not all is as it seems. The most unexpected discoveries can sometimes change everything. It was a cool fall evening, the night Sarah first laid eyes on him. A thin, scruffy dog curled on the ground outside the town's lone grocery store, shivering in the cold. His coat of golden fur was filthy and matted, his ribs faintly showing under his thin coat. Sarah's heart tightened at the sight. She moved closer and extended a bit of the sandwich she had made earlier. "Hi there, pal," she said gently. The dog raised his head, eyes suspicious but wider, something richer, almost human in them. The clerk, an elderly man named Mr. Jenkins, walked up beside her. "That dog has been hanging around here for a few days," he said. "People think he's just a stray, but there's something different in him." Sarah stole another look at the dog. He had none of the traits of a stray. He wasn't looking for food or fleeing from people. Instead, he sat in place, waiting. For what? Or for who? The next day, insisting on helping, Sarah returned with fresh water and food. As she got closer, the dog raised up his head and wagged his tail just a little, almost as if he was acknowledging her. "There you go, boy," she said softly, setting the bowl down in front of him. He sniffed it first, then sampled it in small, deliberate bites. Something strange caught Sarah's attention, and around the dog's neck was an old, ragged collar. Not much more than dirt and grease. She delicately took it in her hand and raised it a bit, showing something dreadful. One name was scratched on the leather: Charlie. Her heart skipped a beat. "Charlie, is that your name, buddy?" she asked. The dog's ears pricked up and he focused on her with such intensity that Sarah felt an instant tether. She realized right then and there, this wasn't a stray. He had a story. Something about Charlie didn't sit right with Sarah. He had a past that no one Fang knew about. She began going around town and asking people if they recognized him, showing them pictures of him. "No idea. Never seen him before," the bakery owner said. "Looks familiar, but I can't place him," the librarian muttered. When Sarah was beginning to feel helpless, an old lady, Mrs. Collins, stopped her on the pavement. "Seems like that dog. He looks an awful lot like the one that used to belong to the Thompson family many years ago." Sarah frowned. The Thompson family? What happened to them? Mrs. Collins sighed. "Tragic story, dear. They left after a horrible accident. I always wanted to know what happened to their dog." Sarah, on the other hand, had a million things running through her head. Could Charlie be their long-lost pet? Determined to get to the bottom of it, Sarah dug around. She did the same online, located old town records, and even went to the house where the Thompsons once lived. The puzzle was a little pieced together. In fact, the Thompsons had quietly fled town following the tragic death of the father in a car accident. In the chaos, their cherished dog, Charlie, had disappeared. Sarah's chest tightened. Had Charlie been waiting to return all these years? Determined, Sarah concluded she couldn't leave Charlie on his own anymore. She called the closest animal shelter and scheduled him for a full vet checkup. While sitting next to him at the vet's office, waiting for test results, she found herself gently stroking his fur. "We're going to work this out, Charlie, I promise." The vet came in, clipboard in hand, a serious look on his face. "I think it's best you sit for this one," he said. Sarah's heart pounded. What could be so shocking? The truth is sometimes right before the eye, in plain view, waiting to be discovered at the right time. Sarah sat in the veterinarian's office, fists clenching the armrests. The bright, fluorescent lights buzzing above her did little to calm her head. Charlie sat quietly next to her, his golden eyes ever so attentive to her presence. noticing her uneasiness. Dr. Reynolds coughed and looked down at the clipboard he was holding. "Sarah, Charlie's pretty healthy for a stray, but I need to tell you something." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What is it? Is he sick?" The vet shook his head. "No, he's healthy, but when you come in for checkup, we scan for a microchip and we found one." Sarah's eyes widened. "A microchip? So wait, he has an owner?" Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Yes. And then according to the records, Charlie went missing 3 years ago, from a place 200 miles away." Sarah gasped. 200 miles? How did he end up here? The vet gave her a printed report with the owner's contact information. "The owner is a woman named Laura Thompson. Do you recognize the name?" Sarah thought of her conversation with Mrs. Collins, the Thompsons, the tragic accident, their sudden passing. Could it possibly be them? Sarah looked at the phone number on the paper, her thumb hovering over the call button. Would it be the same if Charlie's owner had passed away? Wasn't he better off there with her? She looked down at him, his tail thudding softly on the linoleum floor. "What do you think, buddy? Should we call her?" She whispered. Charlie tilted his head as if he understood her predicament. Finally, taking a deep breath, she dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice came on the line. "Hello?" It was both soft, but held a note of sadness. Sarah swallowed. "Hi, is this Laura Thompson?" There was a pause. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Sarah, and I think I found your dog. Charlie." There was silence at the other end of the line, and then a quiet, shaky breath. "Charlie. Are you sure? We lost him so long ago." Her voice broke with emotion. Sarah swallowed hard with a lump in her throat. "Yes, I'm sure. He's here with me now. He's been waiting for you." The following morning, Sarah scheduled to meet Laura in the park where she had initially discovered Charlie. While waiting, she felt an undeniable wave of nervousness wash over her. Would Charlie remember his previous life? Would he want to leave? Then she saw her, a woman in her late 30s, with weary eyes and a hopeful smile. She held a photo close in her hands and looked around the park. The moment Charlie spotted her, he froze. He stood still, his tail stiff, for a brief moment. Then, as if overwhelmed by a tidal wave of memories, he shot off, tail wagging furiously. "Charlie!" Laura wept, breaking down to her knees as he got to her. As the tears rolled down her eyes, she held him tight. "I thought I'd never get you back." Sarah, who had tears in her own eyes as she witnessed the reunion. It was a bittersweet moment, knowing Charlie had at last found his way back home, but grieving the goodbye. Laura was thanking Sarah over and over again, telling her that she could never thank her enough, and Sarah was feeling a little bit of everything. Letting go was hard. Deep inside, though, she knew this was the thing to do. "Now he's yours," Sarah said softly, petting Charlie's head one last time. "Take good care of him." Laura smiled through tears. "Thank you for everything. You brought him home." Sarah, now at peace, watched them go. Charlie's life had come full circle, and although she would miss him, she knew she'd been part of something special. Goodbyes are always difficult, except when it leads to new beginnings. The coming days following the heart-wrenching reunion of Charlie with Laura were met with an unusual blankness for Sarah. The silence in her house was almost unnerving without the padded, soft-pawed gait of her universe-mapping companion, looking up at her with his big brown eyes, tracking her every movement. One evening, she was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone when she received a message notification. It was from Laura. "Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for bringing Charlie back in my life. But I have a hard decision ahead. Could we meet? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What does Laura mean by a tough decision? The following morning, they reconvened at the same park in which Charlie had been discovered. Laura, clearly unnerved, paced back and forth before saying, "Sarah, I love Charlie so much. But my life has changed so much since we lost him." Laura confessed, "I have 2 small children now, and it's been daunting to take care of everybody, including Charlie." Sarah was listening deep, with concern and empathy. "I understand, Laura. It must be a lot to handle." Laura paused and then said, "I don't want to do this, but I think Charlie deserves more than I can give him right now. And I was wondering if you wanted to keep him." Sarah gasped in shock. "Are you sure?" Laura nodded, her voice trembling. "I want what's best for him, and I feel that that's you." This news weighed heavily on Sarah's heart, but as she knelt down to pet Charlie, who looked up at her with those same loving eyes, she knew what she had to do. "I'd be honored to take him in," Sarah said quietly. "He'll always have a home with me." Laura breathed a sigh of relief, fighting back tears. "Thank you, Sarah. I know you will provide him with the life he deserves." When Sarah returned Charlie back to her home, it became full circle. With his tail wagging, he sniffed around the familiar space, calling, as dogs often do, "I'm home." Over the next couple weeks, Sarah and Charlie began to establish a new routine. What would previously just be a walk in the morning turned into a joyful adventure, and they embraced Piroshki evenings, sitting in front of the fireplace for their special bonding time. And she felt a sense of renewed purpose. Charlie wasn't a stray animal she had helped. He was family now. She met Sarah one afternoon in the park playing fetch, and she showed up with her dog, knew about Charlie from her online story. "You really did something incredible," the woman said. "Not everyone would have done what you have done." Sarah smiled, glancing down at Charlie. He's the amazing one. He waited, he hoped, and finally, he found his way back where he belonged. Sarah learned that life had its own plans, and they included the golden retriever that had interrupted her. What had begun as a chance meeting in front of a grocery store had blossomed into a love story of loss and redemption. On their walk home that evening, Sarah said quietly, "We were supposed to find each other, weren't we, Charlie?" Charlie barked back and wagged his tail in relief. Sarah smiled, feeling that this was just the start of their adventure. Sometimes the pieces to our life come together when we least expect it. Charlie was now a permanent fixture in her life, and Sarah was discovering a new normal. They found comfort in one another, and Sarah soon discovered that having Charlie in her life was filling the hole she didn't know was there. One morning, Sarah was awakened by Charlie nudging her hand with his nose. He stood next to her bed, his tail wagging, as if waiting for her morning walk. Okay, Sarah laughed, tumbling out of bed. "Let's go explore, buddy." But as they strolled down the quiet streets in her neighborhood, Sarah was beginning to realize just how much she'd come to be attuned to the world outside herself. The morning sun felt brighter, the autumn air crisper, and even her neighbors had looked friendlier when they spotted Charlie dutifully trotting at her side. After Charlie was settled in, Sarah took him to the local dog park for the first time. She had never been that fond of dogs before, but watching Charlie interact with other dogs, running freely and carefree, made her heart brim with joy. Sarah heard a voice and looked up, warming the hands of a fellow dog owner, a woman named Emma. "He looks so happy. You must be a great dog, Mom." Sarah chuckled. Honestly, I'm still trying to work it out. He kind of found me. Emma nodded knowingly. That's kind of how it goes most of the time. Dogs are such very good at finding the right people at the right time. Sarah looked at Charlie playing with the other dogs, thankful for how life had played out. A few days later, she got a call from the local animal shelter. It was Carol, the director of the shelter. "Sarah, I heard about all you did for Charlie," Carol said. "We could definitely use someone like you at the shelter. Would you like to volunteer?" Sarah hesitated. She was busy, but the idea of helping more dogs like Charlie pulled at her heart. "You know what? I'd love to," Sarah said with a smile. "When can I start?" Volunteering at the shelter became one of Sarah's favorite parts of the week. Hours spent greets all manners of adoption, comforting anxious animals, assisting in training sessions. It was not always easy, but it was rewarding. One night, after she and Charlie were playing in the shelter's play area, she recalled how much her life had changed. She finally felt like she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't where she wasn't supposed to be. "You're the one who did this, Charlie," she said, scratching behind his ears. "You taught me what it means to love." Charlie sighed contently and snuggled up next to her. Sarah acknowledged that life would, without a doubt, continue to present her own unique set of challenges. But with Charlie at her side and a new sense of purpose, she was as ready as she'd ever be. Walking home that night, Sarah felt lighter, with an inexplicable sense of hope, because she was so grateful for this journey that had led her here. "Come on, Charlie," she said, smiling. "Tomorrow, we will see what we get." Sometimes it just hits you when you are not even paying attention. Sarah was busier than ever in the days. Between her work, volunteering at the shelter, and time spent with Charlie, she felt happier than she had in years. So, as per usual, life decided to pull a fast one on us. One morning, during a walk with Charlie on their regular run in the park, Sarah noticed a man sitting alone on a bench. He seemed familiar, though she couldn't place him. Charlie, however, appeared to recognize him immediately. The golden retriever pulled on his leash, tail wagging with excitement. The man turned his head up. Surprised, he opened his eyes. "Charlie? Is that you, boy?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You know him?" The man nodded slowly. "I think so. Years ago, when I still lived in town, I had a dog just like him. But we lost him when we moved. I never imagined I would see him again." Sarah could feel a lump growing in this throat. Could it be possible? He might have been someone else's pet before he belonged to Laura? After exchanging phone numbers, Sarah met the man, whose name was Mark, that afternoon to find out more. He pulled up old photos on his phone, and sure enough, there was a younger Charlie sitting next to a younger Mark. "I used to call him Max back then," Mark said nostalgically. "He was my best friend. Losing him was one of the most difficult things I went through ever." Sarah felt conflicted. She had only begun settling into a new life with Charlie, and now his past seemed to have returned in the most improbable guise. For the next several days, Sarah wrestled with what to do. She had developed a bond with Charlie, and he was now part of her family. But the look of desire in Mark's eyes made her doubt it all. While on the porch with Sarah, one of her friends, Emma gave her some great advice. Perhaps ownership is not what Charlie needs on his journey. Maybe it's love, wherever it is. Sarah sighed. "I only want what's best for him." Sarah thought hard about it, then agreed to meet Mark again, but this time with Charlie. She watched as the two reunited, Charlie identifying his old friend with careful exhilaration. Mark crouched beside him and patted Charlie's fur. "I missed you so much, buddy." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "I believe you two were supposed to reunite." Mark looked up. "Sarah, you've done so much for him. If you'll have me, I'd like for both of us to be in his life." Sarah smiled with relief washing over her. "I'd love that too." From that day forward, Mark was back in Charlie's life, taking him on walks and adventures, and showering him with love. Now, with two families who loved him, Charlie was happier than ever. Sarah understood then that at times, love was not about holding on tightly, it was sharing its joy. Sitting with Charlie in the park one evening, she said, "Looks like you have the best of both worlds, buddy." His eyes shone with gratitude and love, and Charlie wagged his tail. The best things come when we least expect them sometimes. As Mark entered Charlie's life, Sarah found herself adjusting to their new relationship. It was unexpected, but a happy twist, leading to new friendships and a sense of an extended family. On one such crisp Saturday morning, Sarah and Mark met at the park for their usual walk with Charlie. Their golden retriever trotted happily between them, tail wagging with eagerness. "He looks happier than ever," Mark said, smiling, and throwing a ball across the field. Sarah nodded. "I believe that him having both of us in his life is what he needed." Mark looked at Sarah pensively. "And what about you? Is this what you needed?" Sarah inhaled deeply, observing Charlie scamper free. "I think so. Funny how life sometimes works out like that. I never knew my life needed a dog, and now I can't imagine it without one." Charlie's story spread through the town, and more people started contacting Sarah for advice on rescuing and adopting dogs. I was in the middle of this growing community of pet lovers that wanted to make it a better world. One night, I received a call from Carol at the shelter. She had some great news. "Sarah, the mayor heard about you and the work you do for Charlie and the shelter. They want to put you in the town's community magazine." Sarah laughed in disbelief. "Me? I'm just a guy who took in a dog." Carol's voice was gracious but strong. "No, Sarah. You're a guy who gave him a second chance and inspired so many others to do it also." A couple weeks after, Sarah recounted the interview with the local magazine. She told the story of Charlie's journey, from being mistaken for a stray, to reconnecting to his old self, to starting a new life full of love and adventure. Sarah was inundated with responses when the article was published. Messages flooded in from people whose lives had been affected by her story, thanking her for reminding them of the power of simple kindness and second chances. "I never thought I'd inspire people like that," she told Mark, as they read through the comments together. Mark grinned. "Sometimes the smallest things take up the most room in your heart." With the support of the community on their side, Sarah and Mark were inspired to hold a local adoption fair, showing off dogs in need of loving spaces. The event was a great success. Many dogs were placed along with their forever families. It was a sense of fulfillment when Sarah saw the little girl hugging her newly adopted puppy. That's what it's all about," she said softly. Mark hovered next to her, nodding. "Yeah, and it all began with you and Charlie. Over the years, Sarah's life evolved in ways she had never envisioned. With Charlie around her and Mark as one of her very close friend, she was more hopeful and open. It was some evening they were strolling along their beloved path in the park, and Sarah looked at Charlie and said, "I really think we found our place in the world." Charlie barked in agreement, his tail wagging as if he had known all along. The best relationship is one in which your love for each other exceeds your need for each other. As seasons shifted, so did Sarah's outlook on life. Thanks to Charlie's presence, this quiet, reserved woman had opened up and become engaged in her community. They transformed daily rituals into precious moments, and the bond between them strengthened. Sarah and Mark took Charlie to go hiking into the hills one crisp fall afternoon. Golden trees colored the landscape. Crisp air filled their lungs. They climbed the winding trails. "Charlie's got more energy than us put together," Mark joked as the dog bounded ahead of us, its tail wagging like a metronome. Sarah laughed as she watched Charlie run with glee. "I think he's just trying to catch up on lost time." At the top, they were breathless. Rolling hills for as far as the eye could see, and the town of Millbrook nestled in the valley below. Sarah cast over at Mark and Charlie with a feeling of gratitude she hadn't felt in years. After their hike, Mark paused before speaking while they sat in front of a small bonfire. "Sarah, I've got an idea. What if we go deeper into Charlie's story? How about we start a blog, or even a social media page, to motivate people?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "A blog? Me? I wouldn't even know where to start." Mark smiled. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll cover the technicalities part, and you share all the amazing things you and Charlie found each other through. Just think of how many people you could touch." The suggestion stirred something in Sarah. "You know something. That's a great idea. Charlie's journey has been incredible, and if it inspires even one person to adopt or rescue a pet, it'll be worth it." For the next several weeks, Sarah and Mark poured themselves into building a website named Charlie's Second Chance. They posted warm photos, stories of their travels, and updates about other rescued dogs who had found their new family. Overwhelming response to, you know what? People everywhere sent messages from all over, thanking Sarah for sharing her journey and inspiring them to open their hearts to animals in need. One message stood out, an email from a young woman named Emily. "Your story was the deciding factor in my adopting my first rescue dog. I was and am scared, but seeing what you've done with Charlie made me brave enough to take that step. Thank you." Sarah wiped a tear. It always hit home how important their story is. "We're really helping Charlie," Sherry barked back, putting her head in her lap. Eventually, the blog started to catch on, and local businesses began contacting her to sponsor adoption events, and Sarah soon found herself at the helm of a movement she never dreamed she would be a part of. That evening, while she and Mark were chatting about their plans for an upcoming fundraiser, Sarah turned to Charlie and said, "You know, I think we've found our purpose." Mark nodded. "And it all began with one dog who wasn't really a stray." Sarah leaned back in her chair, smiling. "How funny life works, isn't it?" Charlie sighed, pleased, almost in agreement. That's where true growth lies, outside our comfort zone. Charlie's Second Chance, as Sarah and Mark's blog was called, grew up, and so did the responsibilities. More followers, more expectations, and Sarah was balancing her job, her shelter work, and running the online community. One afternoon, as she sat at her kitchen table answering emails, she sighed. "Mark, I don't know if I can keep up with all of this. It's overwhelming." Mark put a calming hand on her shoulder. "You shouldn't have to do it by yourself, Sarah. Let's find a way to make this last. Well, maybe we can enlist volunteers," he said, "to help run the blog." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That might actually work. We could have people from the shelter get involved, hear their stories too." Mark grinned. "Exactly. You're not merely running a blog, you're a community builder." Wanting to alleviate the burden, Sarah contacted several of the shelter volunteers. People were eager to share their time and talents. It was impressive. She was surprised. Emma, a woman she'd met at the dog park, volunteered to manage the social media accounts, and another volunteer, Jason, began writing up weekly adoption success stories. With the additional support, Sarah finally felt that she could breathe. The blog took off, with heartwarming reunions, adoption advice, and updates on Charlie's adventures. The moment Sarah had started thinking things were rosy, came a confidence-shaking email. It was a sharp remark from a reader who doubted the veracity of Charlie's story, suggesting it was too perfect to be real. Sarah felt a twinge of doubt creeping in. What if people believe we're making all of this up? Mark looked at her firmly. Sarah, you know the truth. Charlie's story is true, and it has changed so many lives. Don't let one bad comment ruin all the good you've done. Taking his advice to the extreme, Sarah chose to be more open than before. She posted behind-the-scenes glimpses, unscripted snaps of struggles and wins, and talked about the challenges of managing all of that. As the weeks wore on, Sarah learned to focus on the positives. Messages kept coming in from people whose lives Charlie's journey had touched, every single one of them, a reminder of why she started all this in the first place. One in particular stood out, from an elderly woman named Margaret, who had just adopted a senior dog. I read your story, and that gave me the courage to adopt again after losing my beloved pet, Margaret wrote. Charlie's journey reminded me that love doesn't end, it just transforms. Whoa, some. Sarah wiped a tear and smiled. Charlie, this is why we do it. Encouraged from their feedback, she continued building the blog with the support of her team. More dogs were adopted, more lives were transformed, and Charlie, always, was at the center of it all. It was one evening when they were sitting on the porch and watching the sunset. Mark went to Sarah and poked her. So, what's next? Sarah chuckled. Honestly, I don't know. But with Charlie at my side, I'm prepared for what arrives next. Charlie barked joyfully, tail wagging vigorously. Challenge often comes disguised as opportunity. Sarah was learning the ropes of maintaining her professional and blog lives with her growing obligations at the shelter. So, what did she do? One afternoon, as she sat responding to emails, an unusual message appeared in her inbox. It came from a national pet supply company, and it was a sponsorship deal to help fund Charlie's second chance. Reading through the details, Sarah's eyes widened. Mark, you're not going to believe this. They want to sponsor us. Mark grinned as he looked up from his laptop. That's amazing, Sarah. That could be so big for what we're doing. A thrill bubbled up inside her, but so did a bit of dread. Open enrollment was a time for growth and acceptance of sponsorship, but it also ushered in more responsibilities and expectations. Later that night, Sarah was relaxing on the couch with Charlie snuggled nearby. She absently stroked his fur, lost in thought. What do you think, buddy? Are we ready for this? Charlie raised his head and gave her an encouraging nuzzle, as if to say they were. The following day, Sarah called the company rep and accepted to go ahead with the sponsorship, a mixture of excitement and nerves for what awaited. Now, with the new sponsorship in place, Sarah and Mark simply decided to expand their efforts. They produced blog posts by the professionals to showcase adoption success stories, training tips, and behind-the-scenes moments with shelter dogs. The sponsorship also enabled them to provide essential supplies to foster families experiencing financial hardship. Before long, they held their first community adoption event under the name Charlie's Second Chance. Dozens of families came out to meet the shelter dogs and hear Charlie's story in person. "We are so very grateful," Sarah said as she watched families walk away with their new furry family members. This is why we do it. she whispered. Along with growth came new challenges. Sarah was trying to manage media interviews, social media duties, and the shelter's increasing demands. Self-doubt crept in, and some days felt overwhelming. In one fraught afternoon, Mark noticed her struggling and proposed, "What if we create more of a schedule and divide up tasks more? We can't do it all by ourselves." Sarah hesitated, but he was right. She enlisted many more volunteers to support with day-to-day operations, which left her space to breathe and devote time to things that mattered most. It was a chilly evening. Sarah was sitting on her porch with Charlie, drinking her share of tea and watching the horizon change colors into shimmering hues of orange and pink. "You've changed my life so many times," she whispered to him, choking back tears. "I never imagined one dog could lead to something so big." Charlie gazed up at her with his warm, loyal eyes, and Sarah knew in her heart that all of the challenges had been worth it. As the adoptions came through and lives were being changed, including Sarah herself, she knew this journey was far from over. With Charlie alongside her, she was prepared for whatever lay ahead. "Let's keep making a difference, buddy," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. Charlie barked happily and thumped his tail in agreement. Sometimes taking a chance is the best decision you'll ever make. As Charlie's second chance began to flourish, Sarah started to feel a sense of fulfillment that she had always craved, but there was still a question in the back of her mind. What next? One afternoon, while the two women were at the shelter reviewing adoption applications, Carol approached her with a thrilling but intimidating offer. "Sarah, the local news wants to do a piece on you and Charlie. They want to share how one small act of kindness became a community movement." Sarah's eyes widened. "Wow, that's amazing. But, Carol, I'm not sure I want to be in the spotlight like that." Carol smiled. "Consider how many lives you have yet to touch, Sarah. It's not about you, it's about the story." Sarah glanced down at Charlie, who looked up at her with trusting eyes. "I guess it's time to take the leap of faith," she said softly. In the days before the interview, I was a blend of excited and nervous. Mark aided Sarah with fielding potential questions, and Emma focused on freshening up the shelter and tooting recent adoption raves. "Just be yourself," Mark told her. "People love authenticity, and you've got tons of it." On the day of the interview, the shelter hummed with anticipation. Sarah took a deep breath as the camera crew set up, as she repeated the mantra in her mind on why she was doing this, to inspire others. But once the cameras began rolling, Sarah's nerves evaporated. She talked passionately about Charlie and his journey, the importance of adoption, and how Charlie's second chance had provided her with a renewed purpose in life. "It started with one dog," she said, looking over at Charlie next to her with a smile. "And now we've helped hundreds of dogs get their forever homes." The segment aired the same night, and the reaction was massive. The shelter was flooded with inquiries, and Sarah's inbox was filled with notes from people who felt moved to adopt or volunteer. "I never thought our story would touch so many people," Sarah said while going through the touching messages. As the attention grew, Sarah welcomed the opportunity for their work to expand. She partnered with other shelters to hold bigger events and began contacting potential corporate sponsors for extra help. One afternoon, she opened an email from a major pet care brand. They were impressed with her work, and they wanted to partner with Charlie's Second Chance to provide resources for foster families. Sarah grinned. "Mark, can you believe this? Asking," they said, "is our little project to something so much bigger." Mark laughed. "I can believe it. You and Charlie were made for this." Sarah looked back on the last year and realized how much had shifted. Because of her and her willingness to take a chance on a stray dog, Charlie had given her a new purpose, a new family, and an opportunity to help others. As she sat on the porch with Charlie at her feet, she said, "We've come a long way, haven't we, buddy?" Charlie sighed contentedly and nuzzled her lap. Sarah smiled, feeling a deeper peace than she had tasted in years. And we're just getting started. Just one act of kindness can ripple so much change. As Charlie's second chance flourished, Sarah could start to see the way that their work was resonating among the community. What began as a modest rescue mission had transformed into something far bigger than she'd ever dreamed. When Sarah woke up one morning to an invitation to speak at a regional animal welfare conference, the email described how their work had spurred shelters statewide to launch similar programs. "Mark, I have no idea if I'm ready for this," Sarah admitted, looking at the email. Mark smiled reassuringly. "You never feel like you're ready, but you always surprise yourself. Besides, you have such a great story to tell." Taking a deep breath, Sarah thought about how far they had come. "I think it's time to spread it around." The day of the conference arrived and Sarah perched backstage, clutching her notes nervously. Glancing down at Charlie, who sat quietly next to her, she whispered, "We got this, right?" Charlie wagged his tail, his solid body anchoring her jitters. As Sarah took the stage, everyone in the room turned at her and Charlie. Her heart spoke of their journey, the struggles, the triumphs, the downs and the ups. "It began with one stray dog," she said, looking down at Charlie, grinning. "And it became a mission that changed my life and the lives of so many." When she finished, the room broke into applause. Afterward, people came up to her wanting to know how they might start similar programs in their own communities. In the aftermath of the conference, Sarah and Mark began strategizing on how to expand the movement. They began hosting online workshops, sharing their experience and giving tips for fostering and adopting local rescues. Emails flooded in from across the country from people who wanted to help transform their own towns. Sarah and Mark put in countless hours to develop content, bringing in specialists to share training strategies, rehabilitation and outreach ideas, and field-tested experiences. One night, after hours of brainstorming, Mark looked at Sarah and said, "Have you ever considered writing a book?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "A book? Yeah, you have such an inspiring story. Why not put it out in the world?" Sarah thought about the idea, and for the first time, it didn't sound impossible. With Mark's support, Sarah began writing a book outline. She wrote it all out, pouring her heart into her message, retelling all of the moments previously that had brought to this moment. Charlie's second chance, however, kept meeting new challenges, growing, advocating for the principles of adoption and a world where every pet can have one. One afternoon, as Sarah wrapped up another chapter, she glanced at Charlie curled up next to her. "I wouldn't be here without you, buddy," she said, whispering. Charlie raised his head and licked her hand as if to say, "We're in this together." Sarah was excited to get started as she sent out her book proposal to publishers. With Charlie beside her and a whole community behind her, she knew they could keep making a difference. Who knew one stray dog would bring all this? She mused aloud. Mark grinned. "It's when you're least expecting something. Sometimes the best things happen." Stepping outside your comfort zone is where all growth starts. As the book proposal left their inbox, and Charlie's second chance was gaining traction across the country, Sarah was walking through uncharted territory. The idea of being the author and a national advocate for rescue animals was both exciting and intimidating. Then, one morning, Sarah got an email from a big publishing company. She opened it with her heart pounding. "Congratulations, Sarah. We're excited to have you turn in your book. Let's talk about next steps." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Mark, they want to publish it." Mark hugged her tightly. "I knew they would. This is just the beginning." When Sarah began writing and giving talks, she found it hard to balance these new duties with her job at the shelter. She was torn between her love of getting her hands dirty, trying to save as many as she could, and her work advocating for others. One night, sitting on the porch with Charlie, Sarah heaved a sigh. "How do I do it all, buddy? I don't necessarily want to lose sight of why we started this." Charlie seemed to realize she was upset and placed his head on her lap as if to say, "I'm here." After thoughtful consideration, Sarah determined to establish limits and assign more shelter responsibilities to the fantastic volunteers she learned to rely upon. With that plan in place, Sarah was able to concentrate on writing the book while still being involved in the shelter's mission. As she wrote, she grasped how very deeply Charlie had influenced her life. In one of her chapters, she wrote, "Charlie didn't only transform my life, he taught me what hope and unconditional love really mean. He taught me that second chances aren't just for animals, it's for people." She glanced over at Charlie and smiled as she wrote the last words of her manuscript. "We did it, buddy." Months later, Sarah stood at a crowded bookstore clutching the first print copy of her book. When she took to the podium, the anticipation from the crowd felt palpable. "This story is not only about me and Charlie," she said, her voice calm but emotion laced throughout. "It's about every person who's ever opened up a home to a rescue animal and had to change in the process." The audience erupted into applause, and she felt overcome with gratitude. She signed books, met other animal lovers, and shared tender moments with those whom her journey had inspired. After launching the book, Sarah and Mark started to strategize how to expand Charlie's second chance into new cities. Shelters all over the country sent them invitations, wanting to partner with them and spread their message of hope to even more communities. On a cold evening, she sat by a fire with Charlie up on a rug next to her feet and whispered, "Who would have thought one stray dog could change so many lives?" Charlie wagged his tail lazily, relaxed and happy. Sarah smiled, knowing that there was still much more to come. As a matter of fact, it was just getting started. Doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will. Doubts started rolling in as Sarah and Mark worked tirelessly to expand Charlie's second chance beyond their small town. Could they actually maintain this rate of growth? Would they be able to keep their original mission while growing to other cities? One night, having spent a grueling day in meetings and strategizing, Sarah sat on her porch, staring into the dark sky. Charlie's warmth lay against her side, a sweet comfort of how far they had come. "I don't know if I can do this, buddy," she whispered. "What if it's too much? If we lose track of why we began?" Charlie, sensing her anxiety perhaps, or maybe just trying to reassure her, nudged her hand with his nose, as if to say, "We've already saved thousands of lives." The following day, Sarah contacted Carol at the shelter. "I fear that we are doing too much too soon," she confessed over coffee. Carol smiled knowingly. "Sarah, growth is never easy. But keep in mind, you're not in this alone. You've got a team, and you've got Charlie. Trust in what you've built." Inspired by Carol's words, Sarah arranged to meet with her core team to talk about what they could do next. And so they sketched out a sustainable expansion plan, dispersing to one city at a time, rather than jump-starting into deck-to-deck locations. Outline in hand, Sarah started to regain her confidence. She traveled to a nearby city, where a struggling shelter demanded their assistance. Her vision for change was reborn as she walked through the facility itself. Sarah told the director Charlie's story and how their work in Millbrook had helped. "We're here to guide you, step by step. A small step can get you to a larger point." The director nodded, hopeful. "We've been needing this inspiration for a long time. Let's do this." And back in Millbrook, Sarah and Mark organized an event to garner support for their expansion goals. Local businesses reached out with donations, volunteers jumped in by the dozens, and the community rallied once again behind their mission. Sarah knew she made the right choice after witnessing the excitement of the people around her. There were challenges ahead, but she felt prepared with the help of her community. At the end of the event, Sarah stood on the stage and looked at the crowd. This journey began with one dog in need of a second chance. And now, because of all of you, we're able to give so many more people a second chance. The applause rang out as Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She smiled and looked down at Charlie. "We've got this, don't we?" Charlie agreed by barking, wagging his tail. Every ending is simply a new beginning in disguise. Sarah stood outside the newest branch of Charlie's Second Chance, in a town no larger than the ones she had visited before, and felt incredibly fulfilled. From that one serendipitous encounter with a stray dog, Alexandra was now flying with ideas bigger than she could have ever imagined. Charlie was standing proudly next to her, his golden fur glistening in the afternoon sunlight, tail whipping with excitement. "We did it, buddy," Sarah said, stroking his head. "We really did it." The grand opening was an event full of activity. Families came eager to meet the adoptable dogs as volunteers helped guide them through that process. Sarah watched as children laughed, mothers grinned, and shelter dogs quivered with joy. That's what this was about: hope and love and second chances. Later that night, sitting on her porch with Charlie napping next to her, Sarah reflected on everything they had gone through. From that fateful rainy night when she found him to the struggles, the victories, the incredible people they had met on the way. "You know," she said softly, looking at the stars, "I thought I was rescuing you, but maybe you were rescuing me all along." Charlie raised his head and licked her hand, his eyes shining with the same unswerving loyalty that had seen them through every adversity. As Charlie's second chance grew, Sarah became continually inspired by the stories of new families finding their perfect companions. Each one represented a reason she was taking this leap of faith in the first place. Mark came and sat next to her with a cup of tea. "You've changed so many lives, Sarah, including mine." Sarah smiled, warmed by his words. "We all did this together, and I suspect the best is yet to come." Even through it all, Sarah discovered that the greatest returns are often the most unexpected. She learned that love knows no bounds, and second chances are always worth fighting for. She gazed out at the quiet night, whispering a silent thank you to Charlie, to the community, and to herself for not giving up. Sarah smiled as Charlie sighed contentedly and rested his head on her lap. They had found their forever home, at the shelter and in each other. Because home, after all, isn't just a place. It's a feeling, a bond, a second chance. And for Sarah and Charlie, the journey had only just begun.